Hey guys, welcome to Vikings Happy Hour. Tonight we are joined by guest Chris Tomasson of the Pioneer Press, and we're going to talk all things Vikings. We're going to catch you up on some coordinator searches, the state of the Vikings offseason, and everything else that comes with it. So grab your drink and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Vikings Happy Hour, where we mix our favorite beverage and talk of your Minnesota Vikings.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour. Tonight we are joined by Chris Tomasson of the Pioneer Press. Chris, thank you for joining us on such short notice. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, but all I have is iced tea. I think I better get a harder core beverage, you think, for happy hour or not?
Hey, that is completely up to you. I've been on this show and I've drank water, tea, you name it. It's whatever you feel like drinking tonight. So if you want to partake in some alcohol with us, be my guest, but there will be no judgments made here on the show this evening. So
Okay. I'll stick with the iced tea for now and we'll see how it goes.
I can respect that for sure. Um, Ryan, welcome back. Fresh off of vacation here in Mexico. I don't know, what time did your flight get in today?
Yeah, we've landed about 4 o'clock, so I've been home since and just trying to get my legs under me drinking this Coronas. I'm not quite ready to leave Mexico yet.
Well, if the temperatures didn't set you back in reality here, I don't know what will. But I am I am excited tonight. I'm excited to talk football, uh, especially with you, Chris. I mean, I think that you've kind of like built a name for yourself out on Twitter, um, just with your reporting style, your tenacious journalism. I think it's very respectable. I appreciate it, and I know a lot of other people do. So I want to kind of rewind the clock here, though. How did you get to this point? Like, how did you get to be a writer at the Pioneer Press covering the Minnesota Vikings? Because I know this is not your first stop.
Oh, so I'm a consummate veteran, I guess, huh? Okay, wow, you won my whole career. Well, went to Northwestern University and was pretty much covered the college ranks down in South Carolina. Actually, I worked with Mark Craig of the Star Tribune, my first regular job with the Canton Repository in the Hall of Fame city of Canton, Ohio. So then I
Wow.
was in South Carolina covering Clemson in South Carolina. I went back to my hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico, covered New Mexico basketball. And then for years, I covered the NBA. I covered the Cleveland Cavaliers for the Akron Beacon Journal, the Denver Nuggets for the since defunct Rocky Mountain News. Then I was a national NBA writer for AOL Fan House. And then I was down in Florida before I came here covering the Miami Heat and Dolphins from 2011 to 13 for Fox Sports. And been here and have been fully on football since 2013 with the St. Paul Pioneer Press.
And I assume you like it because, I mean, you've been through a couple different head coaches now, right? Did you cover the end of the Chili era, or were you just Frazier into Zimmer?
No. I got here for the tail end of Leslie Frazier. I mean, my
Okay.
timing was terrible. I started 5 games into the season. They were 1-4. They just gotten blown out by Carolina. Everybody knew Frazier was going to be fired. Adrian Peterson was having the issues with a child of his dying up in the Dakotas, and I walk in and
Oh,
oh
yeah.
hey, I'm covering the Vikings. Yeah, the timing was not excellent, but covering Leslie Frazier was outstanding. And as other writers will tell you, I mean, one of the classiest guys I've ever been around. After he got fired, he took the media out to Wildfire in Eden Prairie and all bought us a meal and gave each of us a nice cross pen, which mine is still working 8.5 years later.
Wow. Uh, I have to ask, did Zimmer by chance do that for the local media members?
No, no, we have not heard from Mike Zimmer, any members of the media that I know of since he departed, and I don't even know if any players have heard from him because it was interesting a few weeks ago when he got fired. Rick Spielman met with the team, but Zimmer did not. And Eric Kendricks, we asked him on a Zoom call if he had even talked to Mike Zimmer that day. He said he hasn't. So who knows who Mike Zimmer has talked to since his departure.
Yeah, it's been a crazy offseason thus far. I mean, I think when you start with firing your GM of however many years and then a long tenured head coach, the offseason is bound to be full of a lot of talking points. And we're kind of seeing that through, a month and a half here, leading up to the Super Bowl. What are your takeaways uh, of the Vikings offseason thus far?
Well, I think they got a good one in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as general manager. I mean, all the reviews are excellent. He's a bright, personable guy. I thought his press conference a few weeks ago was outstanding, and then several of us media members had a chance to just talk to him one on one in kind of a get to know type session. And yeah, I think it's off to a great start. And next week they should officially name Kevin O'Connell as the head coach. He looks like a dynamic choice and a very energetic type guy. So it seems like there's kind of a new energy with the Vikings.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems like a fun times ahead. One thing I wanted to just kind of back up on just a little bit here, Chris, is obviously your relationship with Zimmer was interesting to say the least, of course, right? And I think it's got a lot of intrigue amongst the Viking fans, especially a lot of us that actually watch this show. Could you maybe just provide some insights into kind of that dynamic and how it got to those levels of just the kind of back and forth you two had?
I basically just asked the questions and I waited what the answers were. Sometimes you'd ask a nice positive question about how some offensive lineman was doing, and you got a 3 word answer. And other times you'd ask him something hard hitting about his job status, and he'd go on and on. So with him, you just never knew. So, hey, all I say is when people ask me that, I just ask the questions and can't control the answers, obviously.
That's got to be a little difficult
Absolutely.
though from like a media perspective, right? Because to your point, you just ask the questions. You're there to do your job, um, and you know he can get upset all he wants. But is that make it difficult as a media member to kind of have a head coach like that? Uh, I mean, to go from Frazier, right, who takes you out to nice dinners when he gets fired from the Vikings, to a guy like Mike Zimmer, who all you're trying to do is do your job, and he kind of has these remarks, or just is very short answered. Is that difficult for you at all, or do you just brush it off and move forward?
I mean, you'd look for other sources to talk to, obviously. If you I mean, even if you're doing some glowing story on a player and Zimmer, for some reason, doesn't want to expound on him. I mean, the offensive and the defensive coordinator spoke every week and others spoke.
Yeah.
It's been a little bit more difficult the past 2 seasons because the locker room hasn't been open. So it's been Zoom calls or just podium type situations. I mean, there's been some one-on-one interviews that have been set up the last couple of years, but yeah, I mean, everybody in the media is looking forward to returning to the old days. I mean, it was
Yeah.
crazy that I hadn't met Justin Jefferson one on one and talked to him until I went to his Thanksgiving function, and I mean, he knew who he was. He knew who I was, and obviously I asked questions in press conference settings, but finally had a
Hmm.
chance to just chat with him one on one. And there's still players who got drafted that I haven't really met. I mean, so let's get this COVID situation over with. I mean, I don't want to come to a guy, 5 years after he's in the league and say, "Hey, I'm one of the guys that covers the team." I asked you some questions on a Zoom call 5 years ago. So yeah, it's been a real drag for all members of the media. We're all hoping to get back to normalcy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you
absolutely.
kind of you kind of alluded to just the craziness that the last couple years have been. Um, I just have to ask, like in your tenure as writing for the Vikings, reporting for them, what has been like the craziest season for you thus far? Like, is it the last couple years, just given the COVID restrictions, or is it something else that we just don't know about?
There's a lot of competition. There's one writer who's been around for a while. I won't mention his name, but every he kind of knows he's been around for these crazy seasons, and every time something wacko and unbelievable happens, we ask him, where's it rank in your top 100? Is that top 10? I mean, the Vikings, just so many crazy things have happened. I mean, 2016 was absolutely wild. I mean, you had the terrible stuff at the start of the year with Teddy Bridgewater going down and all that kind of stuff. And then,
Hmm.
but then the 2016 season to end in a meaningless game against Chicago, when you're looking up at the rafters and these two people are hanging from the rafters protesting the Dakota pipeline at US Bank Stadium, and they're up there during the entire time of the game. I mean, you just don't get any more insane and outrageous than that. So the 2016 season definitely had a lot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. To kind of turn gears here a little bit more towards the future, we started talking about Quasi a little bit. I really appreciated you diving deep, going deep in the card of tricks of talking to his ex-coach in basketball. I think it was at Yale. Any insights into any cool stories or anything we need to know about our new head coach, Kevin O'Connell?
Well, I mean, I did talk to Chuck Long, who was for us old timers. I mean, he was second in the Heisman Trophy voting for Iowa in 1985. Kind of flamed out as an NFL quarterback, but I mean, he's a legend in Iowa, and he was actually Kevin O'Connell's college coach at San Diego State. So I did a story on him last week, and he basically gushed about him. I mean, talked about his personality and his intelligence and just how he was at San Diego State, that he could tell that this guy had coaching type qualities in him, just the way he asked questions and tried to absorb things and that sort of stuff. And, we kind of forget he was a pretty darn good quarterback when he was drafted. He went in the third round in 2008 to the New England Patriots. And, who knows if a couple things had gone his way, maybe he would have been the next Tom Brady. He went to the Patriots 3 rounds earlier, but he only lasted 1 year with them, not 20. But no, I haven't met him personally, but looking forward to next week when he should be introduced.
I do have a question for you. And it kind of, talks about Ryan and when he asked you about, going about, connecting with people who are connected with the Vikings. And I think, even is most recent as last week, you were talking with Jim Harbaugh, right? Like texting with him. Um, and so I think what my question is here, like, how do you figure out like where you're gonna go? Because I feel like you never stop working. I feel like every time I log into Twitter, there's a new tweet from you, and it's another new tidbit that no other media member really has. And so I personally think that's super impressive. And I just want to figure out like where's that drive from and what keeps you going?
Well, I don't know about that, that I'm not resting, but I appreciate your thanks and appreciate you and following me on Twitter. But yeah, I mean, I just try to cover what bases I can. I mean, I fortunately was able to get hold of Jim Harbaugh's phone number last week and talked to him for a minute and a half. Didn't get much out of him, but he was a pretty nice guy for a minute and a half. I'd never talked to him before. I didn't know him, so that was kind of cool. And then tried calling him after he was out of the running for the coach. And, I left a voicemail and sent him a text, and I didn't expect to hear back. And then he kind of sends me a text just about how much admiration that he has for Adofo-Mensah and saying the Vikings are a first class organization. So, hey, it's just putting out the feelers. So, you know, you make 100 phone calls and maybe two people you don't expect to get back from, and you hear back from one of them. That's one more than zero, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you just got to take your shot, right? I mean, the worst they can do is not respond, and then you just kind of move on. So I can appreciate that for sure. Um, I don't know if you've heard about our show or not, but last week we had Chad Graff of The Athletic on our show uh, in what was a pretty pivotal moment. I think an hour before the show is when it broke that Harbaugh was not supposed to be head coach anymore. We're shifting gears to O'Connell, but one thing he was able to provide a week ago, which is kind of breaking news today, is the fact that defensive coordinator Ed, is it Donatel? Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Yeah, I think you got it.
Yeah, is emerging as the favorite for defensive coordinator for the Vikings under O'Connell. Do you have any news there or any info that you can share with us how that search is going, along with any of the other openings on the Vikings coaching staffs? I know we lost Ryan Ficken to the San Diego Chargers, amongst some other positional coaches as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's names in the mix for the Vikings defensive coordinator job. I mean, I'm not going to go as far as saying Donatel is the favorite. There was a report today that he is. That very well might be true, but I'm a little bit of the okay. Let's hold your horses. They still haven't officially named the coach, so and we're already talking
Yeah.
about coordinators, but yeah, he's definitely in the mix. And then you got Weaver from Baltimore, and Pleasant from Detroit, and Desai, the guy from Chicago. So those are some of the names that are in the mix. And any of them that's more of a favorite over the other, I mean, I'm not going to profess to say that. But offensive coordinator, I was talking to some folks yesterday, and I think that Wes Phillips of the Rams is definitely, for offense coordinator, a name to keep an eye on. I mean, I had some people telling me that O'Connell, even before he got the Vikings job and he was a candidate for other players, wanted to take him to whatever job he got as his offensive coordinator. But I think the key there is that he could be a guy that replaces O'Connell on the Rams. So if you're Wes Phillips and you have both job opportunities to replace the Rams, potentially a Super Bowl champion, or to uproot and move to Minnesota, I mean, maybe you take the Rams over the Vikings. So that'll be kind of interesting to see if he has a choice, or at least, next week lands one of those jobs, either Minnesota or the Rams.
Are
Very
are you
interesting
hearing
stuff. Yeah,
anything?
I was gonna say I
Go
have a
ahead,
hard
Ryan.
time believing I have a hard time believing Wes Phillips wouldn't want to stay with the Rams. Of course, anyone who's connected to Coach McVay is seemingly getting great opportunities around the league fairly quickly. So that would make a lot of sense. But who knows? Maybe his relationship with McConnell is strong enough. It's definitely one that I've been as well as a good connection. So that's great. Matt, go ahead because I
Yeah,
think
he
you
and
were going to ask
O'Connell are
something
very
in
close.
light of that.
Yeah, he and O'Connell are very close. They were together in Washington as well as also with the Rams. And then, of course, Wes Phillips, who's the son of Wade Phillips, grandson of Bum Phillips, had Kirk Cousins. I mean, he was a tight ends coach, but he's familiar with Kirk Cousins. He was with him for 4 seasons in Washington as well. And O'Connell was with Cousins for just 1 season in Washington.
I think you kind of led me to something I do want to talk about, but I don't want to talk about at the same time. It's beating a dead horse when we bring up Kirk Cousins, whether it's on this show, whether it's you know he's just he is the Minnesota Vikings right now. If you talk about the Vikings, Kirk Cousins will come up, no doubt. And so we had a report the other week, right? Schefter, after the Pro Bowl, kind of mentioned that O'Connell wants to work with Kirk. We have friends of the show over at Score North, Judd Zolgad. He was saying, of course, that's what, they'd want to leak at this time because you don't want to deflate the value for Kirk Cousins heading into the offseason. Are you hearing anything about Kirk Cousins? And aside from your job, what is your opinion about just Kirk Cousins as the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings?
Well, I think you kind of know what you're going to get from Kirk Cousins. I mean, Kirk Cousins is Kirk Cousins. I mean, I find a little bit mystifying though. I mean, you look at his numbers in his career, and if you covered up his one loss record, you'd be surprised to see that he's a 500 quarterback, and it seemingly doesn't matter what happens or what he does. I mean, he's always a 500 quarterback. But it's going to be interesting to see if he's willing to work with them at all. I mean, I asked Kirk in his last press conference after the Chicago finale if, I said, well, you take up 21.6% of the salary cap potentially next year. You willing to do anything about your salary and that sort of thing? And what do you think of your future? And he, in his quotes, kind of left open the possibility that, hey, he doesn't know what the number was, but the way he said it, he kind of sounded like he might be willing to work with the Vikings. And of course, that was before he knew O'Connell, who we worked with in Washington, was going to be the coach. And I haven't
Yeah.
seen Kirk Cousins comment yet on O'Connell specifically. I know Dalvin Cook last weekend spoke to NFL Network and said he was talking to Kirk Cousins, and Kirk was really speaking up O'Connell, just talking about the energy he brings and how much Kirk liked him. So, the bottom line is if Kirk Cousins is not the quarterback, who is? I mean, there's nobody in house that's realistic option to start next season. Kellen Mond's not ready. The draft isn't a great one for quarterbacks, so anybody you potentially took at 12 could even be a crapshoot. And so if they're going to move on from Kirk Cousins, who has the $45 million cap number, 35 million guaranteed, I mean, you've got to either get a quarterback back in a deal that you think is fairly solid and is at worst a bridge quarterback, or you've got to know that there's a guy in free agency that boom you can get right away. You trade Cousins and then sign this guy. So I mean, until there's a realistic look at what the other options are for the Vikings, I mean, who's going to replace Kirk Cousins? It's kind of hard to say they're definitely going to trade him until there's a potentially realistic option as his replacement.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah,
a
and
lot of
it's
rumors out there that like Stefanski is, potentially interested in reuniting. And then of course there's some obvious needs around the league that could, bring Kirk in and help a team who's ready to roll right now. What we do know is that we just can't carry that $45 million hit into next year with our cap situation as it is today. So there's a lot of uncertainty there that I'm sure you're thirsting for more clarity on as a reporter for the team. Um, I do want to quick jump to one of the fan questions here. We had a couple of people who are asking some questions in the chat. We usually like to give them some love. Dan Henneman here had mentioned, what's your best Sid Hartman story? So we're kind of going away from the Vikings a bit. I'm sure there's a little real. It's probably a Vikings related story. Any insights on Sid Hartman and interactions with him that maybe come to mind for you?
Maybe not a great personal one, but I would say historically, I mean, you look back at film from, Super Bowl 8 or even a Super Bowl that the Vikings weren't in, and then you see the footage of the announcers talking to the winning coach or something, and there's Sid Hartman lurking in the background trying to, put his mic in. I mean, there's almost a Forrest Gump quality that he had, that he was like everywhere, especially in football. I mean, some big game, and there was Sid Hartman kind of squeezing in to try to get the quote or, knowing some guy or something along those lines. So that's probably my greatest memory when I think of him versus maybe, anything specific alongside him, because I certainly knew of Sid Hartman well before I got here in 2013. And even when I got here, I mean, in 2013, he was probably 93 range or something like that around then.
it
He was a legend, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, Ryan, you make that a tough transition because it's tough to pivot off of a legend like Sid Hartman here. So apologize for just the brutal transition here, but I do want to talk to you because you've been in the media for a long time, Chris, and you have a lot of fun stories. What is maybe one of the craziest stories that you've had or you've maybe discovered when trying to dig in on some background for whether it's Vikings players or coaches or hell, you said you covered the Denver Nuggets. I assume that was back in the Allen Iverson days. So maybe there's some stories there too.
Well, I don't know if it's a crazy story, but I'll mention Allen Iverson. I mean, he was just actually a joy to cover. I mean, he had all
Oh,
these
fun.
problems and he had all these problems in Philadelphia and afterward, but in the 2 years he was in Denver, I mean, he was great. And I would say to people, God, we must have been bad reporters. He didn't do anything wrong then, and they would say, no, he loved Denver. And I remember just a couple times in the parking lot, I would follow Allen Iverson out, and he would just go on, and I would have to end the interview versus him. If you're talking to someone, usually they end the interview, especially a big star, and I'd be kind of like after 20 minutes, okay, Alan, gotta go. So yeah, it was absolutely great covering him. But crazy stories. I remember once somebody out of the blue when I was a national NBA writer for AOL uh, Fan House had sent me something to the effect that Derek Favors, the guy who was, I think, the number 2 pick in the NBA draft, he's still playing, was his son. And Derek Favors didn't even know who his father was. And this guy provided me all this documentation. This guy had played for St. Louis University or something along those lines, and he gave me all this evidence and all of this stuff, and I went on some like stakeout mission to the draft camp in Orlando and basically tracked down Derek Favors and basically told him who his father was, which he didn't even really know. And I mean, that was just a crazy story. And he talked a little bit about it, that and that sort of thing. And
Wow.
last I heard, they were going to try to develop some sort of relationship, but that was kind of wacko when someone just emails you, because I had written a feature on Derek Favors when he was in college and about how he was hoping to be the number 1 pick in the draft. And then when somebody just emails you out of the blue saying that, oh, I'm Derek Favors' father. And, he had been separated from his mom at a super young age, and it proved to be accurate.
Well, Chris, I think that if if you want to stop writing, maybe you could have a daytime TV show where you just connect, people with their mothers and fathers. You just have anonymous submissions, and you can just pursue that path if you kind of want.
Yeah, maybe we'll
Uh,
get some interesting emails after this particular session hearing that story. But yeah, that was a crazy one that popped into my mind.
Well, and you have
uh,
some good feel good ones here, and then of course, we see here on Twitter and whatnot that there's some scuffs that kind of happen, right? Brashad Breeland is probably the most recent one where it seems like he kind of came at you for something you had said, and I think other players have done it in the past. Any interesting or highlight worthy player exchanges that you've had? Maybe more on the kind of weird or negative side.
Well, I'll announce now that Brashad and me are best buddies. He said something on Twitter that I tweeted, and I said, "Well, let me DM you." So I direct messaged him, and we had a fine conversation. And just a few weeks ago, he turned 30 years old, and I sent him a message wishing him a happy 30th birthday, and he responded for sure. So no issues here between me and Bashad Breeland. But
Love to hear it.
yeah, yeah. Well, hey, we're best buddies. So if you're listening, Bashad, good luck in your next stop, and once again, happy 30th birthday. So, what was the rest of the question there?
Just any kind of interesting stories around, obviously you gave that great one with the Derek Favors and Allen Iverson. Maybe more on the kind of negative side, like anything weird that's ever happened with a player that is worth like noteworthy that would be interesting for these fans.
Here's kind of a funny one. It involves Hall of Fame baseball player Gaylord Perry. I was in South Carolina in the 1990s working for a paper, and I was writing some columns too. And he was the baseball coach at Limestone College, a local college. And then, so I wrote he didn't get into the Hall of Fame one year, and I wrote a column saying, yeah, he's probably deserving of the Hall of Fame, but he isn't a first ballot type guy. Should probably needs to wait some time. Jim Palmer, I think, was up. Palmer's a better candidate, that sort of thing. So I interviewed him for the advanced story, and that was what kind of appeared in a column. So the next year, I'm contacting Gaylord Perry, and I'm told, oh, he won't speak to you from what you wrote last year. And I'm like, huh? Because you had written the story that he shouldn't be a first ballot Hall of Famer, which was ridiculous. And then he ends up getting into the Hall of Fame, and our paper wanted to do like a big giant story or section on him, so they contacted him. And Gaylord Perry, the baseball coach at Limestone College, says, no, I won't speak to your paper unless you fire Chris Tomasson. So here we have a Hall of Fame baseball player saying they won't speak to the paper unless they fire me. Thankfully, they didn't fire me over something so ridiculous as I'd written the year before, that he wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he should probably eventually get in. No, I haven't. That was years ago, so I don't know if Gaylord Perry will talk to me, or if after all these years he's still refusing to talk to me. So who knows?
You'll have to reach out just to find out, right?
Okay.
um, I feel like we could talk stories with you for a long time, but I do want to get like your personal opinion just on the Vikings in general right now, in kind of moving forward. We've talked about Kirk, we've talked about O'Connell, we've talked about Adofo-Mensah as well. But what are your overall thoughts of like where the Vikings franchise sits here today? You've almost covered this team for 10 years. You've seen the ups and downs. You've seen, you know, star players get hurt, get suspended. So here we are. It's a new regime. What are your thoughts on the Vikings in general right now, and where can they improve moving forward if you were GM?
Well, they've
Long
obviously
question,
got a
I know.
lot of Yeah, they've got a lot of talented young players. I mean, you look at a Justin Jefferson, no doubt. Dalvin Cook, maybe he's not young for running back anymore, but he still obviously is a top level player. They're kind of in between in that weird stage. I mean, some people are saying, oh, they need a rebuild, they need to start over, but I don't think the Wilfs are going to a total rebuild. I mean, Mark Wilf pretty much said when he fired Zimmer and Rick Spielman on that day that this isn't a total rebuild, and I believe him there. But then by the same token, unless you do something with Cousins, and if you did something with Cousins, that might be rebuilding. Then I really have the cap room to go out and sign a whole bunch of people. So I mean, it's almost like in 2020, if you recall, they kind of tried to rebuild and stay the same, stay competitive at the same
Yeah.
time. And it didn't work. I mean, they went 7-9, but maybe they're saying to themselves, well, it didn't work because, we had the injuries, and look at who we had, but we now have new, vibrant, exciting personnel and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's another hybrid type thing where they're kind of trying to retool. They're not going to call it rebuilding. They're going to try to retool while staying competitive. I know that can be sometimes tough, the 1 foot in, 1 foot out approach, but they're kind of stuck in that middle ground. And I mean, if you just totally say we're going to rebuild, I mean, you're going to tick off Justin Jefferson, and who knows what he might want to do in his future, and other younger players. But obviously, they have to do some things differently than what they've done before with the same old.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Sorry, I got sidetracked there for a second. You talked about Justin Jefferson. Well, I'll get to that in a second. The Wilfs, to your point, they mentioned that they don't really want to rebuild. They kind of want to somewhat remain competitive, right? They don't want to call it a rebuild. It's a lot easier to do when there's a seventh seed added to the NFL playoffs, right? I think we saw Philadelphia make the playoffs this year. San Francisco, they do have an elite defense, but they did get hot at the right moment to kind of make that point. Do you think that hurts or helps the Vikings in 2022? Because I feel like they need to be definitive in their approach and they can't be like the 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like you mentioned. And so, do you feel like with NFL adding the seventh last year, it's going to hurt or help the Vikings moving forward?
Well, if you think about it, I mean, look how close they were to making the playoffs this past season. I mean, they technically finished one game out. I mean, if Philadelphia had something to play for in the last game, that might have been different and it wouldn't have been a one game situation. But you just reverse the outcome of the Detroit game, which they gave away, and the Dallas game, which they should have won. And I mean, two games reverse, and they're all of a sudden 10-7. And I think the Wilfs
Hmm.
are thinking that way. I mean, I'm not saying necessarily that 1 foot in and 1 foot out is like the best approach. I mean, that doesn't sell tickets like, hey, we're going to kind of half rebuild and half stay good. But I think they're kind of they're kind of in that spot where you're almost have to, in a ways, do that because they have enough talent that to just tear it down. I don't know if that makes sense. And then you alienate some of your young players if you're just going to be losing, and then you might end up losing them. But then again, some of the veterans are old and that sort of thing. So it seems difficult that they're going to improve a lot from an 8-9 record. But when you hire a new GM and a new coach, I mean, they're seeing things in these people, or else they wouldn't have hired them. And putting yourself in the shoes of the Wilfs, they might be saying, well, look at this Kevin O'Connell. This guy is the next Sean McVay, the next Zach Taylor. I mean, you interject him with this offense and the same cast as when 8-9 would have gone 11-6. I mean, that might be what they're saying, and I'm sure they're going to put a lot of conviction into their new head coach.
Yeah.
Well, again, the issue here though is that we aren't rolling back the same team, right? We're I think 15 million under or over the cap right now, with four starters leaving on defense. Either in a nickel setting or in a base setting. And we still don't have an answer at center or guard, and we have no money. So of course, yes, you can extend Kirk, you can restructure Hunter, maybe cut Pierce or restructure that deal. But there's still going to be a lot of holes with little to no money. So, any direction you're thinking of how they maybe, if they do elect to do that, how they would go about trying to field a competitive team? Because we don't have replacements on the roster that are starter level at those positions.
Well, they're going to have to make some hard decisions on some of their veterans. I mean, you brought up Daniil Hunter. He's due an $18 million roster bonus on the fifth day of the new league year in March. I believe it's March 6th, around March 16th range, the new league year starts. So March 20th, I guess, would be the fifth day. I mean, you can't just pay Daniil Hunter, who's played 7 games in the last 2 years. Oh, here's his check for 18 million. Hopefully you'll be look good and be healthy next year. So really, there's probably, I mean, you have to either renegotiate with him. You have to, you could take the 18 million and divide it up among 4 years, and then that's a 13.5 $1 million cap savings. Or you just bite the bullet and say, well, or you try to trade him, or you just cut him and boom, you save 18 million. So they're going to have to make some very tough decisions on some high paid guys. Hunter's one. Harrison Smith's due 8 million roster bonus, I believe, in the third day of the new league year. And it's important to note that, I mean, Spielman and Zimmer, who were very close to Harrison Smith, they're gone. So Adofo-Mensah and O'Connell don't have that quote emotional attachment that Smith has. I mean, do you just move on from him? And you also look at Adam Thielen, who's got a crazy cap number, 16.9 million in that general vicinity, and that's kind of a crazy. I mean, I think he's still productive, but he's your number two receiver, and that's a pretty crazy cap number for a number two receiver. You might have to make a hard decision regarding him. So I think it's going to start with, and then of course Kirk Cousins, we've already talked about. It's going to start with making some hard decisions on some of those huge cap numbers.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point, right? Like it's a new regime here, and there's going to be a lot of different perspectives on these guys because I think as we saw in the past, there were times when we think of people like, I mean, a Chad Beebe, for instance, um, who would always get brought back because the coaching staff liked him. That's not necessarily the case anymore, and uh, to your point, maybe we see some long tenured veterans that we're used to seeing on Sundays in purple no longer playing for our team. I know you did Harrison Smith, Adam Thielen. That's a good one I thought of. Um, when you think of maybe Kevin O'Connell's personnel that he wants to implement, uh, as sad as it may be, maybe CJ Ham is a guy that might be on the outs. I think you could cut him for pretty cheap and save about 1.5 million in cap as well. So, uh, yeah, to your point, it's going to be fun here coming in what 2-3 weeks. But I want to get your takes, and I know we've taken up a good portion of your night tonight, and I'm very appreciative of you hopping on. I want to get a couple more of your takes. One being Justin Jefferson's comments today on Kirk Cousins. And it can be a simple yes or no answer, but are you buying what Justin Jefferson is saying about Kirk Cousins? Um, do you believe that he thinks Kirk is his quarterback and he can win with him, or do you think that was more he was coached by, the Vikings to just say the correct thing and kind of move on?
No, I believe him. I think he's pretty sincere. I think he's shown that. I mean, if you remember after the Rams game, I mean, he was pretty much talking about how the team didn't have any energy, and he was kind of questioning things happening down at the goal line. But that had more to do with coaching. I mean, I think he's an honest fellow. And his comments today really weren't that much different than what he said after the season finale against Chicago. He pretty much came out and spoke very well of Kirk Cousins and said he wouldn't have had all these yards or this kind of season without Kirk Cousins. So, yeah, I believe he's being sincere. And I mean, the people who state that, oh, he doesn't have a good relationship with Kirk Cousins, et cetera, a lot of that is based on just kind of his reactions in games when he's wide open or on the sideline or anything like that. But I think that goes back to Justin Jefferson being exceedingly competitive, and it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. If he feels that he's open, he doesn't get hit, he's going to kind of wear his emotions on his sleeve at times, and he's that type of competitive guy. So no, I didn't. I read his comments as genuine and consistent to what he had said previously about Kirk Cousins.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment, right? I mean, we can't really read too much into these comments in the off season, right? I mean, it's going to be a long off season. We're going to hear lots of things. Justin Jefferson said he liked Kirk Cousins, and I think we just kind of roll with that. The other breaking news today for the Vikings, right? I think Mike Garafolo from NFL Network reported it early this morning, but the Vikings hired Ryan Grigson for a senior role in the football personnel department. So he served alongside Kwesi, um, before, but now he's going to be joining the Vikings. Any thoughts on that move? Um, do you have you been doing some digging on some people that might know him or have any insight to what type of person he is?
Well, the Vikings announced that move today, so that is an official move. No, I think it's an excellent move. I mean, obviously, he's got 23 years of experience in NFL front offices, a former general manager. He's comes from the personnel scouting type side, while a lot of people have been saying, "Oh, adofo-mensah comes from the analytics side. How good is he on personnel?" I mean, the people I've talked to said that that's not a fair rap and that he's been getting better and better with personnel, but it's something that he still is probably working to perfect. I mean, not coming from that side initially. I mean, not even being a football player growing up, but here now he has a right hand man in a former NFL general manager. And it sounds like there's no doubt that he's the guy who's going to be the potential number two guy. I mean, when they come out with the staff directory, we'll have to see where he is on the pecking order, but I don't think that's going to matter that much. This is a guy that adofo-mensah worked for in the last 2 years in Cleveland, trusts him, and he's going to consult with him before making lots of key decisions. And he's going to have that respected personnel guy in the front office. So there's no doubt it seems like a good move.
That's great to hear. I know there's a lot of chatter that maybe we'd bring in that Catherine Reike, or I think it was Brandon Brown, to be as AGM, but to have somebody who's actually been there, done that, I think that's a great move for the team, and hopefully he can bring that knowledge and expertise to help Kwesi as he continues to develop as a GM. In terms of the two new guys that we are bringing in, what has you most excited about this combo of adofo-mensah and O'Connell?
O'Connell, just you hear about McVay, it's true, calls the plays in Los Angeles, but O'Connell plays a key role in developing the game plans and that sort of thing. And you just kind of look at the Rams. I mean, NFL Network had an interview with Justin Jefferson this past weekend, and Jefferson was saying that he'd been looking at the Rams offense and getting excited, and Cooper Kupp is like always open. So you just felt last year with the Clint Kubiak offense that, there was so much more that they could have done with these great talent. I mean, Justin Jefferson, Pro Bowl receiver, Dalvin Cook, Pro Bowl running back, Adam Thielen before he got hurt, two-time Pro Bowl receiver. Kirk Cousins, love him or hate him, he did just go to his third Pro Bowl. So you're thinking maybe more on offense. The Vikings could have been a lot more explosive. And Zimmer always had, okay, I'm a defensive coach. I don't care if we win games 4-2 and that sort of thing. So they're kind of released from the shackles of that. And hey, maybe the Vikings will be winning some 42-37 games this coming season.
Hey, we'd be winning, so that's a plus for us. Um, a couple things I want to do, and then we can call it a show here. Kind of a final question: is there any um, information that you know at the moment, or that you can share with Viking fans? Rumors that you're hearing, um, something we should keep an eye on. I know you mentioned Wes Phillips today, and you mentioned it tonight in the show as well. But is there anything else that you're kind of hearing that you would be okay sharing on the show this evening?
Nothing immediately, because I would probably tweet it out first. I'm like
Yeah,
Patrick
absolutely.
Peterson on his Patrick Peterson on his podcast. I did a big story in his podcast, and one of the things he broke on his own show was he was going to be switching to number 7, and he's like, "Hey, it's my news. I'm going to break it on my own platform," which he did. So nothing, unfortunately, that I can throw out now. But I will say, be very careful on Twitter. I mean, I'm not going to name names of anybody specific, but a lot of people just throw things out and they don't really know what's going on in the Vikings organization, and then they get retweeted, and then you see all this stuff. Oh, I heard the Vikings are going to do this. So learn who you can trust on Twitter.
Yeah, well, I think we learned that lesson, right, with Jim Harbaugh. I mean, we saw people changing their profile pictures to Harbaugh, and then they were all kind of devastated, right? And it kind of made the impact of O'Connell being hired a little bit hired, right? It's not official, but it kind of made that a little bit less exciting because everyone was more so disappointed that Harbaugh didn't get hired. So I can appreciate that advice, uh, and I share it too. So if you're listening to this or watching, um, take Chris's advice. Trust him. Trust Chris.
Yeah,
He
well,
provides a lot of good information.
I mean, the Harbaugh thing. There was the Wolverine, which I guess is some kind of fan site, went so far as to post a day before Harbaugh's interview that he was going to get the job, and it was kind of like, well, I mean, I didn't deny that he probably was the favorite at that point potentially, but it's like he hasn't even interviewed. He's already got the job. He
Yeah,
hasn't even interviewed. I mean, so just be careful a lot of what you read.
absolutely. Uh, I want to give you a chance quick, and then I want to cover Super Bowl predictions right before we end the show. But uh, in talking with you, and we know that you wrote a book, right? And it's out on Amazon, and I think in the link description below on YouTube here, there's a link direct to it. You can go buy it on Amazon. Support Chris. But can you tell us a little bit about the book, and what kind of inspired you to write it?
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, why even a picture on the screen? That's very, very impressive. Is that
Just covering
Dave
up
down in
Ryan, so it
Austin?
works perfect.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so this came out last fall. It's as you can see there on the screen, if the listeners can see it at the same time, imagine they can. The Minnesota Vikings all time all stars. And they actually came to me because there was a similar book done on the Packers. But other than just kind of the format, I mean, I had carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. I interviewed over 50 former players and people for the book. And basically, it's chapters on the best Vikings at every single position in their history. And then you choose an all time all star team of the best players at each position in Vikings history. But in the long run, I think the most interesting part about the book is that whether it's somebody who actually made the all-time all team or somebody who didn't actually make the final cut, there's still a lengthy chapter on over 50 great Vikings players. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, the Gary Zimmerman chapter, I mean, he's a guy who never spoke to the media when he was in Minnesota, when he was in Denver, and he kind of opened up. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame tackle, and talking about kind of his divorce from the Vikings, if you will. I mean, here's a Hall of Fame tackle, and he's not even in the Vikings Ring of
Hmm.
Honor. That's because there's a divorce and things didn't end well, and that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in the book. I mean, Alan Page just kind of it was interesting. I mean, I asked him his greatest honor ever, and you'd think, okay, he's one of two defensive players ever to win MVP. Maybe that's it, or maybe it's getting in the Hall of Fame, or maybe it's not football. Maybe it's being an associate Supreme Court justice in Minnesota. No, his all-time greatest honor was when he had a middle school in the Minneapolis area named after him about 5 years ago or so. So I think there's some
That's
interesting
awesome.
tidbits in there. And for a mere 1995, you can find out what some more of them are.
Yeah, well, like I said, if you're watching the show or if you're listening on a podcast, head over to our YouTube page. I don't know if Dave can throw it in the podcast link as well, but I hope he can. So let's do Super Bowl quick. I mean, it's the big week, and hopefully someday we can be sitting here a Wednesday before Super Bowl Sunday, and it's our team there and not some other team. But alas, here we are, another Viking season where we're just left kind of watching from our couches two other teams fight for the Lombardi Trophy. So, Chris, I'm going to save you to the end because you've seen a lot more football than we have, so I feel like you might be smarter than us. But Ryan, Dave, you can come on out too, by the way. Ryan, let's hear some Super Bowl predictions for Sunday, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah. My brain is telling me Rams. My heart's telling me Bengals. I want the underdog to win. I think that's the Bengals. They haven't won a Super Bowl yet. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, fun story. And I want to say that O'Connell's so much prepping for his new job that he's kind of neglecting his team. I'll say Bengals 27-24.
I appreciate the score prediction. I wasn't going to force you to do that, but now it's you have to. So Dave, sorry, you got to do a score on the top of your head here.
Well, I'm figuring the Rams are going to win this, and we're going to have a new Super Bowl winning head coach. And,
Yes, Dave.
let's show it like 31-24-ish.
All right.
Chris? I do think
What
Cincinnati's going to put up a fight.
I do too. Chris, what do you think for Sunday?
I'm going to say the Rams win 33-27 in overtime. They score on the first possession just so we can have another entire offseason of controversy and overtime rules, because Buffalo, Kansas City, it was the big news. And then Cincinnati ended up beating Kansas City. It was kind of like, okay, well, they got the interception and that didn't come into play then. So I'm predicting the Rams will put that back on the front burner with a scoring on the first possession in overtime 33-27 victory.
I love it. I am on board with you guys. I'm choosing the Rams to win. Sorry, Ryan, because I would like a Super Bowl winning head coach to be coming to our team on Monday morning, and hopefully that happens. I want a close game. I want a high scoring game. I'll say 40-37 field goal. It's a weird score. 40-37 field goal to win it. Kevin O'Connell, Super Bowl winning head coach for the Minnesota Vikings moving forward. Chris, thanks again for hopping on tonight. Really appreciate it. We got a long off season. We have a draft show coming up in April, which would love to have you on just to kind of get your perspective. We run the second we start the draft all the way through draft weekend. So if that's something we can work out, I'll hit you up on Twitter and we can coordinate something. Otherwise, we definitely have to get you back on this show. And since you're just right down the road, right down by Kirk Cousins and Mike Zimmer, we can hopefully meet up. And I know there's some good breweries around there, so then we can have a drink and you don't have to stick to your tea, if that sounds good to you.
Okay, sounds fair.
And if you ever get a chance or need, I can send you up some green chilies from Hatch.
Okay. That might even be a better deal, yeah.
Yes, it is.
That is the better deal. You don't want to hang out with me, but
Okay.
for everybody,
Nah, just joking.
For everybody that listened tonight or is listening tomorrow on the podcast, I appreciate that. If you haven't yet, head on over to our YouTube channel, hit that like and subscribe button. We're here every Wednesday night. Next week, we have Will Ragetz from Sports Illustrated hopping on. Kevin O'Connell should be the head coach by that point officially, and so we'll talk all things Vikings as we inch closer to free agency, the new league year, lots of decisions to be made. So make sure you're coming back next week, 8 o'clock. We will be here. I'm going to toss it to Dave to send us out if there's anything else, but thank you guys.
there's a couple things. First off, Chris, I put up the TwinCities.com Pioneer Press. That is where everybody can find your writings, is it not?
That is indeed. Your graphics are excellent, sir.
And also, tomorrow night, we weren't going to have Vikings hot takes because Eric's down in Caicos getting his vitamin D and his vitamin C via fruity drinks. But instead, we're going to have, most likely, a In the Huddle, but a special one. We are having Flip Mozzie, and we're having Jonas from Vikings Germany joining us for the show tomorrow night. It should be wild. We're going to talk anything and everything Vikings, especially what's happening in Europe and how they're viewing the whole situation. So it should be interesting. And then, of course, on Saturday, you have 2 old bloggers with myself and Darren. And until then, what do we say?
Skol Vikes.
Skol Vikings.
Skol Vikings. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening. As always, if you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate us on your favorite aggregator. Skol, everybody.